What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video I'm going to be going through my top 18 Dynasty tight end rankings, splitting these tight ends up into different tiers. Now typically the tight end position is just kind of a mess outside of like a few guys at the top, but I actually feel like, we've got some young talent coming in, some high upside tight ends. I think the position's a little bit more interesting than it's been in previous seasons, so let's just dive right into it. We're going to start off in Tier 1, and my Dynasty tight end 1 has got to be Sam Laporta. He was the tight end 3 in PPR points per game last season. He was the tight end 1 in total points. Did that as a rookie, which is pretty insane. Typically, rookie tight ends, they need a little bit to settle in. They're not putting up great production in year 1. Sam Laporta did that. He was top 5 in pretty much every single important tight end metric, and he's going to be in a great offensive situation moving forward. So Laporta is going to be my number 1. Now, number 2 is going to be a rookie. I have Brock Bowers here. I know people don't love the landing spot to the Raiders, but I just think he's such an elite prospect. I don't think it's going to kill him. And I know people have PTSD from Kyle Pitts, where everyone was saying Kyle Pitts is this amazing prospect. He's going to not the best situation, but he's so good, he's going to overcome it. And obviously that didn't happen. But they're also two different players here. Brock Bowers is a guy where you kind of just need to get the ball into his hands. He's not a crazy high ADOT guy. He's a lower ADOT player than Pitts. And he also, has been used on end arounds. He gets involved in the run game. In college, he had 19 carries for 193 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. So I'm not saying he's going to smash out of the gate with like Gardner Minshew at quarterback or Aiden O'Connell, but I think he'll be fine in the long term. He's a younger prospect. So Brock Bowers will be my tight end 2. Now, behind him, we have Trey McBride, and McBride really broke out last year. He became a full-time starter in Week 8, and then over those next 10 games, he averaged 15 PPR points per game. If he did that over the entire season, he would have been the tight end 1 on the year. He had the number 1 target rate amongst all tight ends in the league, and he was second in yards per out run. So incredibly efficient, and that kind of lines up with the fact that once he was really getting on the field, he was getting targeted a ton, and even in a smaller sample size, his target rate was still pretty solid. He's heading into year 3. 24 years old, so still very, very young. And in a solid offensive situation here, you have Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in, Kyler at quarterback. I think both those dudes are going to feast in this Cardinals offense. And then my final tier 1 tight end is going to be Kyle Pitts. And I think you could definitely make the argument that he doesn't belong in the group with these three. And I'm not totally against it. I do have him at the bottom of this tier. I just think, I'm not trying to nitpick these tiers too much, because then we're going to end up with like 10 tiers for 18 players. So I have him here in tier 1. If you want to say he's like between tier 1 and tier 2, I'm fine with that. He's had a disappointing start to his career. There's no doubt about it. But he's also been a part of just some pretty brutal passing offenses, and he's also been limited with injuries. We saw that in his second season, and then he was clearly not right in year 3 in 2023. But we still cannot forget that he had the second most receiving yards of any rookie tight end in NFL history. Obviously, that was a few years ago. We don't want to get stuck on that, but he proved very early on that he's very talented. He did it at a young age. He's still only 23 years old, so there's still a lot of time left in his career. And now with Kirk Cousins at quarterback, I really do think Kyle Pitts is lined up for a breakout season here. Now, pivoting into tier 2, 2 tight ends here. We're going to start off with Dalton Kincaid, coming off like a pretty solid rookie season. I feel like some people felt like it was disappointing, and it's probably because Sam Laporta came in and just absolutely killed it. But a tight end 14 in point per game season for a rookie tight end is pretty solid. I would expect Kincaid to have a little bit of a larger role heading into year 2, especially with Stephon Diggs gone. He has a full year of NFL experience. He's not kind of like working his way into the offense, splitting opportunities early on. Like, he should be locked in as a full-time player here. Last year, we saw him used as like a really low ADOT guy. He was targeted a lot, 8th in targets, but only 14th in air yards, 19th in air yard share. So very close to the line of scrimmage, not used down the field a ton. But I feel like a big part of why Dalton Kincaid was viewed as such like a top prospect, and why I really liked him heading into his rookie season, was that in college, he could win all over the field. He wasn't just like, a low ADOT guy who could get yak. He was great after the catch, but he could win at all 3 levels. He could win deep down the field, and we just didn't really see that a ton in his first year with the Bills. So would like to see, an expanded role here in year 2, but he's 24 years old. If he can put it together, he's going to have a lot of upside here paired with Josh Allen and this Bills offense. And then my other tier 2 tight end, a little bit of an older guy, but it's going to be Mark Andrews. He's been a top 5 tight end in points per game in the last 5 seasons. He had one like true elite upside season in 2021 where he averaged 17.7 PPR points per game. He's going to turn 29 during the season, so like I said, getting up there a little bit. but I still think he should be like a high-end tight end one option for, at least the next few seasons. I'm not expecting like all these dudes to have Travis Kelce level longevity, but I think he'll be fine here like over the next 3-ish seasons. And then shifting into tier 3, we're going to start off with TJ Hawkinson. Now he's coming off a torn ACL in week 16. He's probably going to miss a pretty huge chunk of the 2024 season. And it's kind of unfortunate because in 2023, he was putting together by far his best fantasy season, 14.6 PPR points per game. He had the number 1 target share at the tight end position. He was second in targets, target rate, air yard share, and receptions. He was getting funneled opportunities in this offense. He's going to be 27 before the season. And the problem here is like 27, still pretty young, but you're probably not getting much production this year. Like say he misses half the season and then he's kind of gearing up to it over the next few games. Like you're not getting a ton out of him next year, so he probably won't be back to his normal production until like 2025, but still someone who looked like he was, in a great spot last year. You're hoping JJ McCarthy hits and all these weapons can eat in this offense. And then also in tier 3, I think you can make the argument that these guys should be separated a tier, but kind of like what I talked about with trying not to have a million tiers. Going to go with Travis Kelce, and it's kind of crazy looking back on his 2023 season because my memory of it was like, oh, he was so disappointing, he was a letdown, and he still finished as the tight end 1 in points per game. So it really just shows like how high the bar is for Travis Kelce and how much we expect out of him. He's been a top 2 tight end in points per game for 8 straight seasons. His longevity is insane. The dude is 34 years old, so to still be putting up tight end 1 numbers, that's wild. He's under contract for 2 more years. That's probably like the most you can expect out of him, at least in terms of giving you like really strong fantasy production. He's not going to have that many big years left, and a significant fall off could happen at any point, but I'm having him here as the tight end 8, and he could very well be like the tight end 1 in points per game again in the 2024 season. Now, shifting into tier 4, I feel like this is where we do kind of have a real drop-off here. We're going to start off with David Njoku, my tight end number 9. And Njoku's kind of tough to rank because once he actually got good quarterback play last year in Joe Flacco, he turned into an absolute monster. He had 16-plus PPR points in his last 5 games of the season, including their 1 playoff matchup. He was the tight end 7 in points per game. 27 years old, so still kind of young, has some solid years left. You're just kind of hoping Deshaun Watson can get his stuff together, because if he can regain his own form, Njoku's in a great spot, but if this passing offense just continues to struggle, then it's going to be tough for David Njoku to really be like a winning fantasy option. Behind Njoku, I'm going to go with George Kittle, and the tough thing with Kittle is I feel like he's just always going to be a better real-life tight end than he'll be like a fantasy option. From 2018 to 2023, Kittle's fantasy points per game have actually dropped every single season. So he's just incrementally falling. He has a ton of short-term competition here with Ayuk, Debo, CMC. Now you add Ricky Pearsall to the mix. I think you're just kind of hoping like one of these wide receivers gets moved and some things kind of open up. But if he's giving you like mid-tier tight end 1 production for the next few seasons, like I kind of feel like this is a fair ranking. It's tough to rank him this low because in terms of like what he's actually doing from like a real life perspective, he's awesome. But fantasy wise, it just has been falling off like I've been talking about. Then behind Kittle, we're going to go with Evan Ingram here. Coming off like a sneaky impressive 2023 season, he was the tight end 4 in points per game, but he led all tight ends in targets and receptions. He was second in target share, second in yards after catch. The problem is he only scored 4 touchdowns. So 4 touchdowns on 143 targets, that's not great. This offense swapped Ridley with Brian Thomas Jr., added Gabe Davis. Guess he's going to have slightly more target competition, but I still think he should be commanding solid volume in this offense and is going to be a nice option over the next few seasons. And then my final tier 4 tight end, it's going to be Jake Ferguson. Coming off a pretty impressive second season, he was the tight end 10 in points per game. He led all tight ends in red zone targets. He was top 10 in targets, receptions, receiving yards, yak, and touchdowns. I do just think he's a player who's going to have somewhat of a limited ceiling here. His athletic testing was poor. Typically for those high-end tight ends, they test really well athletically. And even though he was commanding targets, he was kind of dependent on the Cowboys being a high-volume passing attack. He was 16th in target share, 17th in target rate. So if the passing volume falls off or he's in a different offense, like the production may not be there. But in this current situation he has with the Cowboys, I think he'll be a fine like back-end tight end 1 play. Now, pivoting into Tier 5, we're going to start off with Ben Sinnott. And I'm pretty in on him as a prospect. I probably have him ranked higher than most here. He just checks a lot of boxes that you'd be looking for a tight end. He had second round draft capital. He had strong junior year receiving production. And then he also tested really well athletically. So, like I said, checks a ton of boxes. Going to the Commanders, paired with Jaden Daniels, we'll see if, he can make an impact here. But someone I'd be willing to bet on over the guys I have ranked behind him. Right after him, going with Pat Freiermuth, and no way around it. He was brutal for fantasy last year. He was like solid year 1, year 2, gave you some decent production. Last year it was awful. He was unrosterable. You could not play him. I do think the Steelers' passing attack should be better this year, and I would be surprised if he didn't bounce back. Like I talked about earlier, it's tough to produce early on as a rookie tight end. Like, we can't just fall into this thing that it's like normal because Laporta did it. And Freiermuth was pretty productive as a rookie and then followed it up with a solid second season. I definitely don't think he's a high upside guy just based on his not great athletic testing, but I think he's someone who for a long time is going to be sliding in as like a back end tight end 1, high end tight end 2, which like in this ranking spot I think is fine. Then we're going to Luke Musgrave, another younger guy here. Production-wise, not a great rookie season, 6.8 PPR points per game, but he got on the field pretty early on. He established himself as the tight end 1, 72% route participation. His usage later in the season kind of fell off because he suffered a lacerated, kidney during like the middle of the season. Then I think maybe like week 18 playoffs, he wasn't out there a ton, but he was a round 2 pick. Really strong athletic testing. This is a young offense that's on the rise, so he could be someone who ends up breaking out here in year 2. Then we're going to go with Isaiah Likely here as my tight end 16, and he's probably like one of, if not the toughest tight end to rank in this video, because I think he might be the only handcuff tight end we have in the entire NFL, right? Like, there's not a ton of tight ends you trust in your lineup week to week for fantasy, and so if a starter goes down, like, you're pretty much never trusting the next guy to just step up and perform. Isaiah Likely is the only dude where if Mark Andrews goes down, Isaiah Likely all of a sudden is like someone you feel really confident starting. In his 2 years in the NFL, these are his point per game numbers when he has at least a 70% route participation. So most of these, either Mark Andrews is out or leaving early. So these are the games: 70+% route participation, 19.7, 9.4, 18.3, 0, 8, 19.3, 18, 8.6, 18.2, 11.4, and 3.6. That's 12.2 PPR points per game for someone who's like currently operating as a backup. He's going to be behind Mark Andrews for at least the next 2 seasons, so he's someone who could really give you like no production over the next 2 years, but he clearly is talented enough to have a starting job in the NFL and get involved and be fantasy relevant. So it's just an odd situation. If you wanted him higher and were trying to like stash him, maybe till Mark Andrews gets older or he moves on to a different team, I get it. It's just very odd because you never see that at the tight end position. After Likely, going with Cole Kmet, probably a little bit lower on Kmet than consensus. He's coming off his best fantasy season, the tight end 9 in points per game. But now he does have some really serious target competition. DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen. I feel like Kmet, like with this group, is probably peaking as like a back end tight end 1, and like that's fine. That's giving you decent production, but in the short term, I don't know if he's going to get there with this target competition. And then he's just not a league winning player in my opinion. And then the final tight end here, it's going to be Dallas Goedert. I'm definitely going to be lower on Goedert than consensus. Totally willing to accept that. And honestly, like every year when I see people draft Dallas Goedert, I always just kind of feel like they're reaching for like mediocre production, or they're reaching for like a tight end 8, tight end 9 season. He's 29 years old, and in 6 seasons, he has never hit 12 PPR points per game. So it just seems like you're way overpaying for like a back end tight end 1. I think Dallas Goedert like maybe going ahead, of guys like Pat Freiermuth, Jake Ferguson, players like that, just much younger options who I think are probably going to replicate his production or at least come close to it. Like back-end tight end 1 production, even though the number might look good, it's like, oh, you're a tight end 1, you're the tight end 9, tight end 10. The difference between that guy and like the tight end 15, 16 that you don't want to start in your lineup, there's not a huge difference at the end of the season. So I'd much rather just, take a swing on one of these younger tight ends that I mentioned, or take the lower ceiling guys, the Fergusons, the Freiermuths, the Kmets that I already kind of mentioned, who can be back end tight end 1s, but are, 4, 5, 6 years younger. So that's going to wrap it up for my top 18 tight ends. Like I said, I think this position's more interesting than it's been in a very long time. A lot of young players here, especially at the top: Laporta, Bowers, McBride, Pitts. Like, all these dudes could end up being, serious studs here in the NFL. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. Let me know your thoughts down below. Who should be higher? Who should be lower? Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.